She cheated and left me for my best friend. She had no idea I was secretly making $500, $0 a year. Hello everyone. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now let's begin the video, using a throwaway for obvious reasons, with certain specifics modified to preserve anonymity. I found out she cheated and left me for my best friend. She had no idea I'd been secretly pulling in around $500,000 a year. I remember the exact moment Olivia decided to blow up our marriage. She was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone like she wasn't worried about a thing. I had just come home from work, about to drop my bag and relax, when she looked up and casually told me, "Marcus, I want to get a divorce." No warning, no softening. The words just came out blunt and cold, as if she was commenting on the weather. I paused for a second, unsure if I'd heard her right. "Excuse me," I asked, trying to keep my voice calm even though I was furious inside. "I said I want a divorce," she repeated with a tone that made it clear she thought I was too slow to understand the first time. Instead of feeling angry or upset, I was stunned by her audacity. After everything we'd been through together, her just dropping that bomb on me. What hit me hardest was her straightforwardness. She said she couldn't keep living like this, crossed her arms, and told me she needed someone who actually worked and contributed. This wasn't the life she signed up for. I blinked, fighting back the urge to laugh. I wanted to ask her what she meant, but I kept my composure. For years, I had built my career from nothing, earning a six-figure salary and setting us up for a future most folks could only dream about. But Olivia, she never once asked about how I made my money or showed even a hint of interest. She always just assumed I was coasting, barely scraping by. I studied her as she seemed so confident she was making the right choice. Finally, I set my bag down and said simply, "All right." She tilted her head in surprise. "What do you mean, all right?" she asked, as if she didn't believe I wouldn't fight her. I looked her in the eyes and said, "Yes, Olivia, if you want a divorce, I won't stand in your way." For a moment I saw a flicker of doubt pass across her face, but she quickly masked it with her usual smug smile. "Good, because I've already talked to a lawyer. You need to move out by the end of the month. Out of my house." The nerve of her was almost laughable, but I didn't argue. If she wanted me gone, I'd leave for now. "Fair enough," I replied, then headed upstairs. I felt her eyes watching me, waiting for me to blow up or plead, but I gave her nothing. Alone in our bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and let the reality sink in. It wasn't really about divorce. It was about power. Olivia wanted to feel in control, to paint me as the failure, maybe even guilt me into fighting for her, praying I'd plead for a second chance. But she didn't know me as well as she thought. The next few days turned into a steady lesson in passive-aggressive behavior. Olivia suddenly had a lot to say about how I folded laundry, spent my evenings, even how I brewed my coffee. She criticized my hobbies, habits, everything. It was as if she was trying to justify her decision by turning me into the villain. Then there was Brian, my so-called best friend. At first, I thought her constant mention of his name was just a coincidence. "Brian said this," or "Brian suggested that." But soon it became clear he was more than just a friend in her eyes. I didn't confront her yet. I didn't want to show my hand. I let her think she was in control, that I was a clueless husband who couldn't see what was happening right under his nose. One evening, I started packing a few essentials into a suitcase. Olivia leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed with that familiar smirk. "So, have you figured out where you're going to stay?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. I zipped up the bag, turned, and said calmly, "Don't worry about me, Olivia. I'll be just fine." Her face twitched with surprise. "Good, because Brian and I are planning a dinner party here next weekend. It'd be awkward if you were still hanging around, seeing us together in my house with my best friend." The audacity was almost impressive. I shrugged. "Don't worry," I said, shouldering the bag. "I'll be gone long before then." As I walked past her, I caught a glimpse of her smug smile. She thought she'd won. But what Olivia didn't realize was that she had handed me the match to light the fuse. If she wanted to burn everything down, I'd let her. And then I'd sit back and watch as the flames consumed her and Brian. Sometimes the best revenge isn't yelling or fighting. It's silence, patience. letting the other person dig their grave while you quietly prepare to bury them. Betrayal, I've learned, is a sneaky thing. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It sneaks in through casual conversations, harmless gestures, until one day you wake up and realize everything you thought was solid has been chipped away. That first crack was Olivia's request for a divorce. After that, the steady crumble of everything I thought I knew about her and Brian, the so-called best friend. I should have seen it coming. Hindsight's a brutal teacher. At first, it was subtle. Olivia started mentioning Brian's name more often. Brian said this. Or Brian recommended that, casually over dinner. I nodded, not thinking much of it. He was a close friend, after all. But as the weeks went by, his name started slipping into our conversations more frequently, and with a warmth that made my stomach turn. The first real red flag was on a Saturday afternoon. Olivia had just come back from lunch with Brian, her cheeks flushed from laughter. I asked her what was so funny and she waved me off. "Oh, it's just something Brian said, you wouldn't get it." I suddenly felt like I was on the outside looking in. When had I become so irrelevant? I realized the answer had been there all along. I'd started noticing the small signs, her quickly locking her phone after texting, dressing up more often when plans with Brian came up, the endless excuses that they were just friends. I didn't confront her about it. What was the point? She'd only deny it, spin some story to make me seem paranoid. I kept pretending I didn't see what was happening right under my nose, until the night everything changed. Brian showed up uninvited while I was packing. I was in the middle of tossing belongings into suitcases, just doing what she'd asked. The doorbell rang and there he was, his grin confident as ever, strolling in without waiting for an invitation. "Marcus, my man," he said like nothing had changed. "How's it going?" I stared at him, every ounce of patience wearing thin. "What do you want, Brian?" I asked, keeping my voice even. He leaned casually against the wall, smirking. "Just checking in. Olivia told me you're moving out and I figured I'd see if you needed any help." The nerve! I shook my head curtly. "I've got it handled." He lingered and I saw the wheels turning in his head. He wasn't here for just small talk. No, he was here to rub it in, to stake his claim. "Look," he said, voice turning a little more serious, "I know this has to be tough for you, but stuff happens, you know, life's unpredictable." I stepped closer, forcing him to meet my gaze. "Yeah, Brian, sometimes things come back to bite you." That made him falter, his confident smirk waver, replaced by something almost resembling uncertainty. I didn't wait for him to recover. I turned back to my suitcase, dismissing him. He hesitated, then said, "You know, Marcus, you've always been a cool guy. No hard feelings, right?" I didn't respond. Silence is a powerful thing, especially when someone's desperate for a reaction. Without another word, Brian shuffled out, and I watched his car pull down the street. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. That night, lying in my bed, the one she no longer shared, I replayed the past few months, missed signals, lies, betrayals. I could have gotten angry, confronted them both, demanded answers. But what good would that do? They'd already written me off, turned me into a mere footnote in their story. But what they didn't realize was that I wasn't the clueless, passive husband they thought. I had been paying attention, taking mental notes, and planning my next move. If they thought they could just walk into the sunset together without consequences, they were in for a rude awakening. Because betrayal doesn't end when the truth comes out. That's when the real game begins, and I was fully prepared to win. Divorce. It's such a small word for an incredibly messy process, implying finality, the end of something complicated. But when Olivia and I stepped into that courtroom, I realized this wasn't her ending. It was her victory lap, a celebration of what she thought was her upgrade. She arrived dressed to impress, in a tailored dress that screamed sophistication, with a smile that made my stomach churn. Not far behind her was Brian, lurking like a shadow. He didn't actually come into the courtroom, of course. He'd never dare. But just being there in the background told me everything I needed to know. Olivia wasn't just divorcing me. She was flaunting her betrayal like a badge of honor. When we sat down at the negotiation table, she said, "Marcus, let's not drag this out. I don't want this to be harder than it needs to be." The irony was not lost on me. She'd already made it tough, brushed over our years of marriage as if it were just an old, worn-out rug she was eager to replace. I met her gaze even and calmly replied, "I don't plan to." The lawyers laid out the terms, the house, some furniture, and a portion of what she called my meager savings. She probably expected I'd fight harder, maybe even beg her to settle for less, but I didn't flinch. I signed everything, each document, without hesitation. She blinked, confused. "You're okay with this?" she asked. I kept my tone light. "Why wouldn't I be? It's just stuff," I said. "You can have it all." For a second I saw doubt flash across her face. She thought she'd won, that she was walking away with everything that mattered. But she didn't know the full story. The house, it wasn't even mine to begin with. It was a rental under my name, just a workspace I'd used when I first started freelancing years ago. The savings she thought she was taking, that was only a tiny fraction of my wealth. The real money was tucked away in investment accounts she had no idea about. As the papers were signed and everything was finalized, she leaned back, satisfied. "Well, I think we handled this like adults," she said, sounding patronizing. I just nodded, biting back a laugh. A week later, I packed up and left the house she so desperately wanted. I handed her the furniture, the decor, even the expensive kitchen gadgets she'd never really used. It wasn't worth the hassle. Brian, of course, wasted no time moving in. I saw a neighbor's photo of him unloading boxes into her new place, Olivia on the porch with that same smug smile. They probably believed they were about to build their perfect little life, completely unaware of the storm brewing just beyond their view. What Olivia didn't know was that I'd already started gathering evidence of her affair with Brian, months before the divorce. Photos, text messages, even GPS history showing their frequent lunches at a nearby hotel. I could have used everything to blow up the divorce proceedings, but I chose not to. Why? Because prolonging the court fight would only add drama. I wanted karma to do its work, and I wanted front row seats when it happened. In the weeks after, I settled into my new life. My career kept expanding. New opportunities kept popping up. My income kept climbing, surpassing $533 a year. I wasn't just doing okay, I was thriving. And I kept it quiet because Olivia had already dismissed me as the man who didn't work. I saw no reason to correct her. Instead, I focused inward. I upgraded my apartment to a sleek, modern penthouse downtown, floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, a breathtaking view of the skyline. It wasn't just a home, it was a statement. My career flourished with the new space, and I poured myself into every project. I became busier, sharper, building something real and lasting. My nights, they were for myself, meeting friends, reconnecting, exploring life anew. I felt lighter, freer, full of potential. Of course, Olivia occasionally tried to reach out, texts, or whispered gossip about her and Brian's latest struggles. The unpaid bills, arguments, mounting debt. One mutual friend even sent me a photo of her and Brian's house with the power turned off, utilities unpaid, chaos unleashed. I didn't laugh. This was justice, plain and simple. They built a facade of success on lies, and now it was crumbling under its own weight. One day I ran into Brian at a coffee shop. He looked awful, disheveled, stressed, twice as old as before. He hadn't noticed me at first, so I had a moment to observe. He hunched over his laptop, scrolling through job listings, lost. When he finally looked up, seeing me, his face twisted with embarrassment. "Marcus," he said, trying to sound casual, "can we talk man to man?" I stood, walking around my desk to face him. "Man to man," I echoed. "You mean the same way you talked to me while sleeping with my wife behind my back?" He winced but kept trying. "Look, Marcus, we made mistakes. Olivia and I are in a tough spot, and we thought you might be willing to help us out, just a small loan." I shook my head, letting out a quiet laugh. "Unbelievable. You betrayed me, lied to me, and now you want me to bail you out. The audacity." His face turned red, fists clenched at his sides. "You don't have to be a jerk about it," I said, voice low but firm. "I don't owe you anything. You made your bed, now lie in it." He started to protest, but I didn't listen. I turned away, saying, "You wanted to be free, free of me, free of my supposed lack of ambition. Well, enjoy it." And I opened the door, gesturing for them to leave. They hesitated, then shuffled out, heads bowed low. As the door shut behind them, I felt a sense of closure. They thought they could manipulate me, guilt me into helping, but I'd changed. I was no longer the man they could run over. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about standing tall, knowing my worth, and refusing to let those who betrayed me bring me down. Sitting back at my desk, I smiled, because they'd thought they'd broken me. Instead, they'd set me free. The beauty of betrayal, it often backfires, turns in on itself. Brian and Olivia thought they could escape the mess they made by sticking together, but the cracks in their little illusion started turning into full-blown fractures. It was almost poetic watching them unravel under the weight of what they'd done. The first sign was a mutual friend named Carla, always one with her ear to the ground. One afternoon she called me, her voice dripping with gossip. "Marcus, you won't believe this," she said. "What now, Carla?" I asked, amused. "Looks like Brian's been seeing someone else." I burst out laughing. "Are you serious?" I asked, hardly believing it. "Dead serious," she replied. Olivia caught him texting a young woman from his new job. Even I couldn't believe it. I shook my head at the irony. The guy who betrayed me with Olivia was now betraying her. Karma was catching up with them fast. Olivia, always so smug and self-assured, was now the one blindsided. She confronted Brian loudly at a cafe, screaming, furious. He tried to brush it off, but she threw her coffee in his face. It was almost too good to be true. The woman Brian cheated on Olivia with, not some random fling, she was someone from his new job. Young, carefree, uninterested in settling down. Brian had convinced himself she was worth risking everything. Olivia didn't take the betrayal quietly. She demanded answers, called him out. But Brian, he wasn't good at fixing problems. He blamed Olivia for their financial mess, kept arguing, neighbors heard shouting late into the night. Eventually, he moved out, leaving Olivia drowning in a dingy apartment with no money. She called me again, her voice trembling with anger and despair. "Marcus, you were right about Brian. He's a liar, a cheat." I trusted him. I leaned back in my chair, letting her go off. I could have offered sympathy, but there was no point. "You made your choice," I told her. "You left me for Brian, thinking he was the better option. How's that working for you now?" I asked. Silence. She finally muttered, "I don't need your lectures, Marcus. I just need help." That was a lie, I told her. "What you need is to accept the consequences of your choices." She hung up. From what I heard later, Brian never came back. He moved in with a new girlfriend, and soon she realized he was just as unreliable as Olivia. Last I heard, he was couch surfing, unable to hold a job or a relationship. Olivia. She was left to pick up the broken pieces. No job, no savings, no friends. Her family had cut ties, tired of her endless drama. The life she fought for, reduced to ash, and I didn't lift a finger. Karma had done all the work. There's a certain satisfaction in watching people like Olivia and Brian destroy themselves. They think they're clever, manipulate their way into happiness, but life has a way of humbling them. While they're busy tearing each other apart, I was thriving. My work grew stronger, my life more peaceful. The best revenge, living well. Because when you're betrayed and humiliated, you learn how resilient you really are. 4. Me, the divorce was just the start of a new chapter, a fresh beginning disguised as a disaster. Olivia and Brian burned bridges behind them, but I was already building stronger ones ahead. After the divorce, I promised myself I wouldn't let their betrayal define me. I'd rise above it, not just to get back at them, but for my own peace. And that's exactly what I did. I upgraded my home to a sleek, modern penthouse downtown, floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist design, a jaw-dropping view. It wasn't just a place to live, it was a symbol of my rebirth. My career took off beyond expectations. New contracts, partnerships, speaking invitations, all funneling into my account, pushing my annual income past $500,000. Meanwhile, I reconnected with old friends who drifted away and made new ones. I started frequenting social events, networking, even enjoying weekend trips, reminders that life could be fun again. The biggest change. Internally, I finally valued myself again. For years, I poured everything into keeping Olivia happy, trying to meet her impossible standards, losing sight of my own worth. Therapy helped me realize I wasn't responsible for other people's choices, only my responses. That became my mantra. I also rediscovered my creative Side writing photography. I began a blog, part journal, part insight, sharing my story of rebuilding, of transforming pain into progress. Sometimes I'd hear whispers about Olivia and Brian in mutual circles, their downward spiral becoming something of a cautionary tale. More debt, more drama, each update only confirming that they were sinking faster. One friend even told me over coffee, "Marcus, you're so calm about all this. If it were me, I'd be furious." I shrugged. What's the point? They're living their karma. Watching them falter while I thrived wasn't just satisfying, it was freeing. Late at night, I'd sit in my penthouse, gazing at city lights, reflecting on everything I'd been through, the betrayals, heartbreak, anger. It hadn't been easy, but I'd done it. I'd come out stronger, wiser, more confident. Life never stops throwing challenges, but I faced every one with a clarity I'd never known. Losing Olivia and Brian. Painful at first, but looking back, it was the best thing that ever happened. They hadn't just left, they'd set me free. Every day now is a step forward. I'm not just surviving, I'm thriving. And I don't need anyone's approval to prove it. I built a life I'm proud of, with people who genuinely value me, filled with opportunities that excite me. My world is bigger, brighter, better than what Olivia and Brian could have ever imagined. And as far as I'm concerned, that chapter with them is over. This is my story now, and I'm writing it exactly the way I want.